Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you. Chris, today, this is a good topic. This is a good, fun topic, and I think an important one, a timely one.
This comes from a listener question, actually.
Yeah, listener question. Taylor emailed us and said, basically, what's the point? I mean, I'm summarizing and paraphrasing here, but is very concerned that field geology was not valued, was maybe becoming, quote unquote, a lost art, and had been advised that going out and mapping rocks was kind of an obsolete skill set. And so the question was really targeted, I think, at research, like going on a research trajectory. Should you go into field geology? And I think a lot of people, Chris, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. Like, a lot of people, as we talked about before, get into geology because it's cool, it's outside, it's fun, they like it. You know, all those things attract people to the field. And if it's becoming an irrelevant skill, that's kind of important to know, right? So it's an interesting conversation to have at this point in time.
Yeah, was there a tone to Taylor's email? Like, was Taylor implying that this was a bad thing, or was, you know, like, hey, this isn't right, where I'm being discouraged from doing field work and this shouldn't be happening? Was there any kind of like intonation that way?
No, not really. I think it was more of just, you know, here's my perception. Here's what I'm perceiving as advice being given to me about the field. Maybe go into, like, make sure you learn technical skills. But is this true? The email was very much, what do you think? Give me some advice. So we'll provide advice on this one. And you know, take this advice with a grain of salt. It's our advice. But I do think that it's
our podcast, Jesse. We can do this.
Yeah, that's right. But I think it's part of our broader conversation, Chris, about the value of geoscience and geology to the field right now. And we're going to focus specifically on the field component, which I know you love. You go into the field teaching students how many days a year?
Oh, it's a lot. I try to get them out as often as I can. Because I just think that it is the best way to experience geology or geoscience is like the field, because how else do you get a feel for scope, you know? For like the magnitude of like how big things can be. And so I do this as often as I can.
I think that's right. And this is a photo number one. Photo number one is Chris Bullheis, recent in the field. This is, I think you were on Summer Science. I was after a photo or a couple photos of you for the website or something. So I texted you, said, hey, send me some photos of you. This is one of them I got back. This is Chris up in the Tetons.
I am. I'm in the Tetons. I'm up at a place that I love. It's up at Amphitheater Lake. And I had just got out of my hammock and I'm like, oh, wow. This is a beautiful day. What a beautiful shot. So I took a little selfie and you know, you're ripping on me for it. I don't think that's right. But I had like...
Well, I'm just hoping you had a little sunscreen in your little half moon hat, you know, area there, that you don't get a little sunburn on that head of yours.
Jenny makes sure I have to. Yes. I've done that though. I get this half moon in the back of my head because we're the trucker hats. So yeah, it's a thing. Yeah, the kids think that's, the students think that's really funny. Yeah.
Yeah, you need a little insert for that.
So, Jesse, what do you think? Are you concerned that field work is becoming a lost art?
It's a great question. It really is a great question. It's perhaps true that field geology is becoming a lost art, but I think that's a massive opportunity for people who know the field, can function in the field, can think about the field, but not exclusively. I don't think so. There's kind of multiple parts to this, and I was advised, Chris, actually, very interestingly, I'll skip ahead here to a photo. This is me relatively recently. This was actually during my postdoc right before I started at Penn State, but this is up in the northern Canada. We're doing float plane supported field work, you know, in the remote Arctic.
You got a Cobra look going on, like you're like doing this. What's going on with you? Trying to
by selfie squint.
Get that fat head all in the same frame there.
It's hard to frame. It's hard to get all the brains all in one frame, Chris.
Yeah,
exactly.
All right.
But I was advised, very interestingly, you know, when I was graduating my PhD, I was kind of debating between, I really had this great postdoc opportunity in the U.S. at the Carnegie Institution for Science, which is like a premier geochemistry institute, you know, had developed geochronology tools all throughout the entire history of this institution. Norman Bowen was there. Anyway, they'd done a lot of experiments, a lot of lab-based work with some really good geologists there too, but it was not fundamentally a field place. And, some advisor of mine gave me advice, said, no, don't go there. Actually, go do field work. Go see as many rocks as you possibly can. Go work for the Canadian Geological Survey, or go work for some survey where you just map, and then go do the geochemistry stuff afterwards. And I didn't take that advice. I went to the geochemistry thing at the postdoc that was really lab heavy, but I had already gotten a lot of field experience in my PhD. And so I think there's value in doing both. And I've had this has kind of gone with me throughout my career. People appreciate when you both know rocks in the field and have like a tuned in innate eye for the rocks. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense. I'm sure it makes sense to you, but I don't know if it makes sense to the listener, like what we mean by that. I mean, how Chris, what's the range of student, I don't know what the word is, eye tuned into the rocksness that you see? You know what I mean? Like that you see students who they're like clearly picking up on the important parts of an outcrop. They're noticing the important differences. What's the range of abilities, sort of natural abilities, without you teaching them? I mean, natural meaning like when they walk in your door.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever thought about it in that way before, but I will say this, and I'm not sure if I'm really going to directly answer it, but what you see is the first few times that students are in the field and they're trying to make sense of what they are looking at, they're fumbling around, they're at a loss. But once they, once they're there, some of the best advice I ever got was I had a problem. I couldn't figure it out. And the person that was like with me just looked at me like I'm the biggest idiot in the world and said, Bullheis, figure it out. And so I just had to stand there and like,
Bullheis, figure it out.
Yeah, and so then all of a sudden, I don't know, a few minutes later, I'm literally trying to solve this problem, and it just came to me, and I saw it, and I don't know why I didn't see it before. I was actually rock climbing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And you just like figure it out.
I couldn't find a handhold. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're just like, figure it out,
and
man.
So, but it stuck with me. It's like, wow, that's actually, and I see that with my students. It's like, I don't want to step in and start helping you right now. I want you to stare at the outcrop. I want you to start looking at go walk to a different spot then, go pick up different rocks and start looking at what you're seeing.
That's right.
And I want to let them kind of fumble about,
Totally.
And then they start to figure out the way that things, it's just this different way of thinking. But that's why you and I think fieldwork is so valuable still as a skill set.
You're really nailing that story nails the value of it for sure. And I think employers are looking for this. They're looking for people who can function in the field. When you can function in the field, you have a sort of an innate three-dimensional kind of figure it outness. You can spatially think about things. You can say, okay, I don't quite understand what's going on in this outcrop. I need something to the left and back behind this thing. That's where my interesting data will be. So I'm going to go rummage around looking for rocks over there to answer the question that I have. There's some spatial thinking, and it's just basic observational skill sets. It's like, what looks the same for an entire outcrop, and then what do I need to focus on? What's the difference? Where is there the most difference that I could focus in on? That's like the thing. And employers are looking for this. So back to like the value of field geology, bedrock mapping, if that's your skill set, if that's the only thing you do and do well, the job market, frankly, is probably going to be a little bit more limited. Like, there are definitely people being hired who do that. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know, in the 80s, when all of northern Canada was relatively unmapped geologically, they were hiring field geologists like crazy because they needed them to go map this place. And all those maps have been made. A lot of the big scientific stories have been told. There's still places to go explore, and there's a lot we don't know still. But I think the days of like field mapping as the big job in geology, I think those are over. You kind of got to pair geology with something else. But that being said, we might, as a community, have gone too far the other direction.
Yeah. I think about it this way. I think
I'm gonna skip ahead. I'm gonna skip ahead, Chris, real quick. And is this
going to go to another one and make fun of me here?
What's that?
Is this the person who said what?
Is this the person who said boys figured out?
That is not the person that said it. She would not have. She would have been much more colorful with her language.
Okay, I see. Yeah, fair enough.
But I think you know that's the truth too.
I do. I'm dying over here. Of course, it's the truth. There would have been a lot more words in there in that sentence than boys figured out.
Oh yeah. Let me use an analogy, I think, or something that I think is relevant today, because I think that I see a trend, and I think you see it too, because we've talked about it. We caught a podcast on this about just how different young students are right now, yours and mine, right? Both. And you're seeing that spillover from where I'm at. Think about math. When back in the day, even probably you had to do the math, right? And now math is different. They have like all of these instruments. I had to do it longhand and yes. And you had to proof everything, and it's just different now. They don't have to do that. So, they're doing math, but they're doing it differently. And I do wonder about, do they understand the bones of what they're doing? Because they don't have that really solid foundation that I think older generation has with this. I'm not saying that that's the best way. I just see a parallel with this, that I think that being able to do field geology is fundamental to like understanding some of the basics of geology.
I mean, there's so much depth to this question of the relative value of field geology. And I think, Chris, you're touching on something exactly right. Like, it's a good place to like start from. It's a good basic to start any interpretation from any geochemical or geophysical data. You really have to understand the complexity in rocks. You have to understand that. I'll skip ahead here. This is Mike Axon, friend of the pod, and I we're up in Nunavut here, our Northwest Territories here, looking at our complicated rocks. Look at the rocks behind us. Those are complicated. They're complicated when you look at it from the air. You can see that there's a bunch of complication going on. When you land on it, you can see in this photo, those are complicated. When you get down with your hand lens, you can say these are complicated. So there's like this complexity occurs at a bunch of different scales, and you really have to understand that before you have to work. If you're a geophysicist who thinks on big scales and looks at big data, you want to work with people who understand this complexity, right? And so I think, to Taylor's question, my advice is to students and my own PhD students is, you got to know the field geology. You got to like have some experience with rocks. You got to be able to know what you're talking about. You can't just be what we call, this is a derogatory term, but we call a rock in a box geochemist, where they get a little sample powder in the mail, and then they're really, really good at measuring, isotope ratios of some random element, right? And that has value. Those people have value too. But you always have to pair that with either somebody or with your own self who knows the rocks. So you kind of make sure you kind of home your interpretations in rocks. I
agree with that, but I think also, Jesse, just a point, because your comment like made me think of this, that there are places where you can go in geoscience where you don't need any field experience.
Absolutely.
It's great to be able to have field experience, but if you're physically unable to do this, you can have a very rewarding career in geoscience and not have those field experiences. It's not that you have to do this in order to be good at what you do.
That's a great point, Chris. And here, this is, where are we? Black Hills? This looks like Black Hills.
Yeah. Yep.
What hike is this?
I think this is Little Devil's Tower, actually. Yeah.
Oh, Little Devil's Tower. Okay. Yeah. This is before you were doing it as the sunrise hike?
No, we do it on. No, that's like after the sun had come up, and it was just such a day that I'm like, well, let's hang out here for a little bit, and then let's look at some geology here. Yeah,
teaching them up in the Black Hills. I mean, what could be better than that, Chris? I think you're touching exactly on this point. I mean, that is such a valuable point to make. I think probably, not your generation, but the generation before you was probably like, you had to have field skills. Otherwise you couldn't get a job. And I think it's very healthy that we have gone completely, like, there are so many opportunities. I mean, we're doing this with our, the field camp at Penn State. There are alternatives that you can do to going on field camp, for accessibility reasons, people who just can't get out in the field for health reasons or for a variety of other reasons can't do the field camp. There are other options. And so, yeah, you can be an amazing geoscientist without knowing rocks. That's for sure true. I think my advice to Taylor, as somebody who it seemed like likes and is able to get out in the rocks, my advice is don't shy away from that. Like, lean into it, but pair it with other skill sets. Myself, this is a photo up in Nunavut. You can again see some really complicated toothpastey rocks. So you got to know, like, for me, I've paired it with geochronology, and I know instruments really well, and some geochemical data, some niche parts, but I've always kind of stayed grounded in the rock record and in the field geology part, because in part that I like that more. I don't get to do it as much anymore.
Here's a question.
In grad school, but yeah.
Here's a question for you, because I think this fits more into like your realm of getting like a research position or getting a job in industry, whatever. I got to believe that having field experience makes you stand out a little bit more, but just because like you have stories to tell, you have experiences then. And so I don't know, you've been advised, Jesse, both ways on this. You've actually been on the receiving end of, no, you need to just go into the lab. And then you've also been advised, no, go get some field experience.
Yeah.
From two very respectable people, right? You got very different advice. What do you think about that? Like is there something to the field experience and helping you out?
Yeah.
Just from the level of,
I think
you're different.
That's a great question. So again, this is just speaking personally from my own personal life and my own personal experience. First of all, in the advice thing, this is why you can't just have one person's advice, right? You got to have what's the phrase, like a kitchen sink or a board of directors in your life, where you got 8 people who you can ask, and you can weigh each of these opinions differently, because you're going to get different opinions. So like, ask everybody, right? So Taylor, great. Ask us, ask your people in your life that you see in 3 dimensions, right? Like, ask a lot of people this question. For me personally, the field stuff I know it's gone with me really well. And what I mean by that is, I was interested in rocks, when I set foot in your door and you just set it on fire, right? We went out in the field a lot in all the classes. I took 3 classes from you, went out in the field a whole bunch on those. So when I started at Hope College, I know that my letters of recommendation that professors at Hope wrote for me said, this guy has one of the most naturally innate senses for rocks in the field that they've seen, because I had all this experience. So, I stood out at Hope College. I mean, I didn't stand out GPA wise, but I stood out for that reason. And so that those letters of recommendation carry a lot of weight, right? So
you had a lot going on. Yeah.
Well, you know, there's things happening. But then that carries on, where my PhD supervisor then, recognizes that stays with you. And my letters from my PhD supervisor say, great in the field, carries out field work really well, like can manage his own campaigns. That helps me get a postdoc. That helps me get a faculty job. And then, I've heard from other people that, it's a great strength to pair geochemistry and field work. And I've heard, I don't know this for sure, but I've heard from people that I was attractive as a professor to Penn State when I was applying there, in large part because of the field program, because I could carry out field programs, get students out in the field, because they felt like they needed more people who were doing that stuff. So yeah, it carries with you. Like that's kind of I'm trying to emphasize that started for me in high school, and that kind of carried its way all the way through. And I think still to this day, it's kind of added somewhat of a strength.
I view it this way, that maybe back in the day that you had to really be strong on field work and you didn't have a lot of other avenues. But I think now being able to do field geology or field geoscience, it's just another tool in your box. We use this kind of like analogy often. We talk about it with geochronology, that you have to use what's appropriate, and you have this big diverse toolbox. And I think that doing field work, this is just an outstanding tool. If you're physically able to do this, then it's something that's good to have. I can't see a situation, Jesse, where being good in the field is actually going to hurt you. In fact, a lot of entry level jobs are field based. Especially here in Michigan. That's
Chris. Okay, I want to come back to that But first, that point you just made, the way you phrased that, it's not going to hurt you to be good in the field. That is absolutely true. So my advice to students that I have, my PhD students or graduate students, is always do the field work in addition. So let's say, come in and you've got what appears to be a pretty lab heavy project. Like we're going to be doing some, instrument development, or I know you're going to be in the lab a lot during your PhD. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure you get a bunch of field work too. Like go to the conferences, go to the conference field trips, actually just go on a field trip for some society that we'll pay for you, so that you go get your eye tuned into the rocks, see a bunch of rocks. Like you don't have to do your thesis mapping to see a bunch of rocks. You can go see a bunch of rocks just by going on a hike and pretending you're mapping the sandstones in the hike or something, right? Like it's just multiple ways to get your eye tuned into the rocks, and there's all sorts of ways to do that, but it's never going to hurt you. Then the employer thing, Chris, that's super, super important. I know our buddy Andrew DeWitt feels this way, but your first job, in many of these jobs, like environmental consulting, a lot of them are starting out entry level field work. And so if you go in and crush that, then you're moving up quicker, right?
That's right.
So
100%. If they can rely upon you to be in the field, to be alone, basically, a lot of the time, and you're getting it done, you're crushing it, they're showing a lot of different skill sets with getting that part done. It's just
and it's a massively valuable skill set, and this is okay. So this is, we're going to go back in time a little bit here, getting the time machine, Chris,
what do you got?
In the photos here. This is being grad school.
Oh, wow. Okay. Look at you.
I know. Looking a little bit. This looks like it's a photo straight out of the 80s, actually. But this is in southern British Columbia. Amazing geology. Just spectacularly cool geology. You're in kind of the core of the mountain belt, and it's just amazing. But the undergrads were doing a mapping project on this whole hill. We'd call it a mountain in Pennsylvania, but sort of mapping this whole area. And it was hard. It was complicated. And you'd see the students over the course of 4 days mapping that, they would slowly work their way out of the fog. And the fog is real. You remember this.
It is. It is real.
You see students go through this all the time. You drop them off and say, okay, figure out what's going on.
I'm going to go eat a sandwich.
Yeah. You're just sit down and be like, oh, this is too hard. But you're okay, you just got to cover ground. You got to who knows what, you just don't know. You're just in a fog. You're I don't even know. Is this a basalt I'm looking at? I think it is, but I got to make sure, you're just in this pea soup fog in that slowly lifts. The more you look at it, the more you kind of think, oh, okay, I think this is what's happening. How do I test that? Oh, I got to go over there and look at that, and that'll tell me if I'm right or wrong. And the more you do that, the more you kind of figure it out. But it just takes that time, and that's the skill sets that you're talking about that can really set you apart, I think.
It's interesting. What I see too is they when they get into that moment where they're in this fog, they have no idea what to do. They start looking at the rocks, because that's what you have to start with. They forget it all, right? They they're so panicky that they don't. They're classify the rocks, right? Just don't name them. Just see if you can. Is this sedimentary? Is this metamorphic? Is it igneous? Start there, and they forget it. That's how I teach them. It's just true. All out the window. It's gone.
It's totally true. But I feel this way whenever I go to a new spot too. I'm going on a field trip, associated with some conference or something, and all of a sudden it's people are looking at it. Somebody turns to you, hands you rocks, what's this? And I'm like, oh boy. I know I've seen this before. I know I heard the person leading the field trip say some of this stuff, but I don't know. I got to think about it. I got to look at it. It's hard. This stuff's tough. And one more thing, Chris, this is teaching them up, Chris. This is full on gym teacher.
Oh, look
Chris
at that!
Boyce
Look at
right
that! Oh, that's old school, man. That's going
school.
Back. I don't have any gray in my goat there.
I was going to say that. There's no gray in them whiskers there, right there. That's all red right there.
That's not red. That was never red. It's brown. I'm talking about red.
Yeah. But this, Chris, to me, this looks like you are on the dunes of Lake Michigan. Is that true? Do you think?
I think I'm actually in the UP. I think I'm up on Lake
Pictured
Superior.
rocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is actually a better analogy then, because to me, Chris, one of the great values of just seeing as many rocks or geological locations as possible is the scale. You get a sense of the scale of things. So up in the UP, when you say, oh, this used to be a mid-continent rift, and there's basalts, there's a kilometer of basalts. If you say that without ever having seen a kilometer of basalts, it doesn't resonate.
Right.
You know what I mean? But let's a mafic dike, 100-meter wide mafic dike, cross-cutting. Unless you've walked across that, it's really hard for you to picture what that looks like and actually picture what might be happening to the rocks around that. You know what I mean? Like,
that's right.
It's just the scale of geology is not intuitive at all. So even if you pictured rocks, like, hey, we're looking at sandstone lenses and this cross-cutting big cross beds and stuff. Unless you have seen that, it's really hard to like link that to nature or link that to a process.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I mean, we've said this before, and the best geoscientist is the person that's seen the most rocks. That, and there's a lot of truth to that variety. But here's the thing: is that being in the field, though, Jesse, allows you to put context with the rocks, and that's hugely important. That's why, like, you probably get this. I get it all the time. Kids are coming into my room and saying, "Hey, Mr. Boyce, I found this," and I'm like, my first questions are, "Where did you get it? What did it look like around you?" I'm trying to give context to what's in my hand now, and it's so field geology does that. It gives you context.
It definitely does that, and I think, Chris, the other thing here that's important to me, this is a college age Jesse in the Grand Canyon here. We're looking down at the Vishnu here. You can kind of see the Colorado River, very muddy.
Absolutely.
In the spring.
Yeah.
This, Chris, I think that you kind of touched on this. The people who know the rocks the best, or the people, what'd you say, the best geologist person who's seen the most rocks. There is an amazing resource in the people who know the rocks around the local area. Like, there are people who know local Pennsylvania geology and they've spent their whole life like looking at all the outcrops around here. They know everything that in a way that, like, I could never know that much, right? Because they've been doing it for 60 years or something. So you can really scale that. You can narrow that like telescopic lens down to say, the person who knows the area the best might be the person who's seen the rocks the most around the area.
Yep.
And so if you want to go up and,
did you go down and touch the Vishnu then?
No, we've covered this before. We didn't make it down. You can kind of see we had to turn around. We were on this field. This was an undergrad field trip, and we did not go past the Kaibab. I guess that's the Kaibab Plateau. Yeah. We didn't go past the Kaibab Plateau there.
Okay. All right.
But
it brings back memories. I love it. Brings back memories. I don't know.
But again, scale, like, it's hard to understand the problem of cutting the Grand Canyon without being there, seeing it, and understanding the scale of it. And so just seeing as many features, back to the kind of advice thing. If you're interested in field stuff, you like the field, I would be hesitant to like take a PhD project that is only in the lab or only looking at remote sensing data without any field component, just because you like it. And I don't think there's going to be anything wrong with having a pretty good sense of how to operate the field. Now,
I think that's really solid advice. Actually, that's huge. You have to, when you're going to do this, it's a long, long time that you're working on this one thing, right?
Yeah.
Becoming an expert,
especially for a PhD. Yeah, totally.
You better like it. You better like what you're doing. And if field work is important to you, then you need to pick a project that's going to incorporate some of that into it. Absolutely.
You know what? And that's what I did. And I know a lot of people who picked their projects because they wanted to get out in the field. I know a lot of people who picked their projects because they didn't want to get out in the field. And that is fine. That is totally fine. But you got to make sure you do both. I got dragged kicking and screaming into geochemistry. But now I absolutely love it. And I'm really good with instruments. I know these instruments really well because I got dragged into it because it was interesting and important and a good skill set to have. So on the flip side, I don't know if I'd recommend students, do a project that's just mapping, because I think if you can do it, but you got to make sure that you got to pick a side piece. You got to pick I'm going to learn geochronology really well. And I'm going to actually try and go to the lab that's doing my analyses. And I'm going to try and learn there. And I'm going to get really into the data and maybe go to a geochronology conference to get that other skill set too. Because I don't think just field work. I mean, a master's, sure, but for a PhD, I'd be hesitant to be like just a field person. That might be bad advice, but I don't know. Just depends what you want. I think do what you do, what's most interesting to you. That's the best thing. So
hard to go wrong when you're doing that, actually.
that is absolutely true. And Chris, are you doing the most interesting thing right now?
Well, I'm talking to you, so, you know.
Well, that wasn't an answer to the question. I was looking for a compliment there, and just
I know you were.
That fell really flat. My goodness! Wow. Okay. That's the other thing about field geology or field work. It just takes you to totally cool places. Just totally cool. I think
I've always
fantastic.
that's an excuse to go into geoscience, is that you always have this card that you can play. Of I have to go travel. Why? Because I'm a geoscientist. I have to go.
Because I'm gonna go do it. Yeah. Chris, where are you going? Where are you and Jenny going this summer for the extra trip?
Yeah, so we weren't gonna actually do one for the first time in a long time.
Yeah,
I
no
can't
kidding.
remember one, but
Really
I was
long
gonna.
time.
I wanted to gut my master bathroom and totally overhaul it, and I want to do it myself. But we're gonna go to the Wind River in Wyoming.
Okay. Nice. Excellent. Okay. For just a
maybe
shorter version?
just a
or-
10 day trip, maybe.
Nice.
Catch a concert at Red Rocks. Yeah.
Excellent. Cool.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Well, that's a
Yep.
good one. That's a good one. There's some good rocks out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You gotta
Absolutely.
bring that vehicle towards Pennsylvania.
I know. I think once. I think I'll be out there like sometime in June. I don't know. Like we have to talk, but we have to
Yeah,
talk.
we'll talk. We'll go look at some rocks in Pennsylvania. I got my eye on a couple cool outcrops I've been meaning to check out. And I was
Good.
like, all right, that'd be a good excuse. Have Chris come
Yeah,
and we can go
absolutely.
bomb around. It'd be great.
Let's do it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Go do some more field
Yeah.
geology. Bring it back.
We'll figure this out for sure. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Chris, I think that's probably. What do you think? Was that probably a wrap? I mean, do we do it
That's a
justice
wrap.
the question?
I hope so. I don't know. I mean,
It's a great
yeah,
question.
I think
It's really
it's our
and it's a-
opinion. It's
And I think let's end with something. This is an evolving conversation, or a very active conversation in our field. Actually, I mean, we're not giving you answers. We're giving opinions. There's a lot of people in our field who are having these conversations. A lot of departments, geology departments across the country, across the world, are evaluating the field camp requirement. Like, for instance, Chris, you had to do field camp, right, at Grand Valley? But Grand Valley did not offer one. Is that right?
right.
Okay. So
That's
that
right.
has been kind of the MO for a lot of departments. Either you offer a field camp requirement or you don't offer it and make the students go take it somewhere else. At Hope, you could either do field camp or you could do undergrad research, and either of those kind of counted for the capstone kind of thing. University of Alberta, field geology was required 2 field camps. They were both a little bit shorter, but 2 of them. And then Penn State, we always required a field camp, but now are providing sort of optionality to those who, for whatever reason can't access the field camp. And I think a lot of departments are just kind of nixing the requirement. They're saying, we don't.
Well, it's complicated because
require
if you
field
don't offer it, then you're sending people out of state then, and you got out of state tuition, which is double what you normally would have. And yeah,
those options are going away. I'm not sure about this, but I don't think our field camp, we used to have students that were non-Penn State students take our field camp. I don't think that's happening anymore.
Oh, okay.
So
all
there's
right. Yeah, because I went to University of New Mexico, and it was 10 weeks long. That was a long field camp.
Undertaking.
Yeah.
It's a serious undertaking. Yeah, for sure, and a serious thing for a university to put on for the benefit of a lot of students from other schools. So that whole system is kind of in flux, and I think as part of that, the people are having these conversations. What do we really value about the field, and what skills do we need to convey? So anyway, it'll be interesting that we'll have this conversation with Andrew DeWitt again, and get his perspective now that he's on the hiring managing side, and say, okay, is this a skill set you really look for? Yeah, we have a couple actually upcoming interviews on that. That'll be interesting from people who know the industry and the hiring aspects. So that'll be useful. Cool.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, man. Well, hey, that's a wrap for this episode. You can find us on all the social medias at Planet Geocast. You can go to our website, planetgeocast.com, and download our mobile app, CampGeo mobile app. First link in your show notes there. We have a bunch of visual podcast series, basically the intro level class that we offer for free there, and some other paid stuff on geology, Yellowstone National Park, Grand Canyon, Grand Tetons, and climate, Solis rocks, and other things like that. You can see this episode along with all the images as well on our podcast app or on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube or Spotify, leave us a comment, like, subscribe, and a follow. We appreciate that.
Cheers.
Peace.